This is the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast, and I am your host, Dr. O. This is season 4. Yes, already. Bigger and better than ever. We are going global, y'all. This season, I will be interviewing leaders and changemakers in the international arena who can give us broader wisdom on survival. But we are also keeping our local flavor. We are introducing RaceHealth on campus. We're going to have our student interns showing their skills with special episodes where they will interview local leaders and their peers, giving us a younger, fresher perspective. I would like to dedicate this season to my mother, Patricia Moses Norum, who passed away suddenly on New Year's Day. She taught me to be proud of being Black, to know that I am brilliant, beautiful, and powerful, and most of all, how to love fiercely. This season is for you, Mom. And of course, for you, our listeners, we hope you enjoy it. We made it with love. It's not enough to survive in this racialized world. We are learning together to thrive. This is Race, Health, and Happiness, and I am your host, Dr. O. Today, my guest is Elizabeth Leiba. She is a professor who has spent more than a decade working in higher education, guiding her students in subjects such as literature, history, instructional design, anti-racism and equity, diversity, and inclusion, and advocacy at the undergraduate and graduate levels. She is a multimedia journalist of Jamaican descent, living and working in Florida, where she has hosted numerous podcasts such as Black Power Moves on Ebony Media, as well as the Ed Up Experience. More recently, she has taken on the roles as Director of Instructional Design and Innovation, founder and course developer for Black History and Culture Academy, which provides educational resources for self-directed learning about African American history. Leiba also has launched a website, Black Women Handle Business, a place for Black women, entrepreneurs, and professionals to network, collaborate, and share resources. She is the author of the book, I'm Not Yelling, a Black woman's guide to navigating the workplace. And as if that were not enough, in 2020, she was recognized by LinkedIn as one of LinkedIn's top voices in education. Woo! Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. O. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate that. Really, you gave me justice with that intro, so I'm almost like, is this really me? Because that sounded very, very good, so I appreciate that too.
Girl, it is you and it is fire. In fact, actually, that is, I've given my, the bio, you know what I mean? Me and my team have been reading about you and listening to your podcast and stuff like that. But one of the first questions I actually ask the guests on this podcast is, what is your superpower? And I know in your book, the first line is, who are you? So why don't we start with that? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words? And hopefully in there, you can tell us a little bit about your superpower.
Oh, wow. What a great question. Well, who am I? And I think that was the central theme of the book, because when I was thinking about this idea of I'm not yelling and the identity of Black women in predominantly white spaces, whether that be in the workplace or just in the world in general, for a lot of us, we are really not grounded in our identity. And I think I say that with love because for most of us, we spent a lot of time trying to assimilate into backgrounds or trying to assimilate into spaces that don't look like us. So a lot of time we have not really thought about who we are. And I wanted to really think about that as a central piece because I feel as though identity for Black folk in America is really at the heart of a lot of our challenges and our struggle that we've had as a community. is that we really haven't had a close relationship with our real identity. And that goes from a historical standpoint to where we're from, the motherland, our connection with the motherland. For a lot of us that are immigrants, we have some amount of connection, but we still don't have that a source of where am I from? Who am I at my core? And I think it was really important for me to think about that as an individual in my actions, that how did my actions reflect the fact that I really wasn't grounded in who I was? I'm from the UK, born in London to a family of Jamaican origin. My dad and mom were both born on the island. My dad's family was originally from Cuba. They're actually of Jewish descent, Spanish Sephardic Jewish descent, which is where that last name Leiba comes from. It's actually tribe of Levi. So it's like Leiba because they actually were from Cuba and they immigrated to Jamaica to plant sugarcane. So I knew that I had a very diverse, multicultural background, but growing up in South Florida, I was in a very predominantly Black community. And I grew up with a sense that I really had to understand the African American experience because that was the community that I was in. So I think my superpower has been this quest for knowledge. It's always been that I'm very curious about the world around me. I always look at the world as an outsider because I have been an outsider in most of the spaces that I've resided, whether it was because I was an immigrant from UK coming into a predominantly Black space, but different from all the other Black people that I encountered, or like when I went into college and I was from predominantly Black South Florida, Fort Lauderdale. I actually went to the segregated high school. So it was during segregation, that was the Black high school. So after segregation, most of the students were Black there. 90% of the students were Black, and most of my college, most of my high school instructors were Black. So I always had a good sense of my identity in terms of being encouraged and being nurtured by the community. But then when I went to University of Florida, I lost that and I kind of lost touch with myself. So I think in the book, when I said, "Who are you?" it was really a clarion call for Black women, specifically Black community in general, but also for myself. Why am I the way I am? Why was I functioning in white environments and not feeling like I was meeting my maximum potential? And what was the source of that? I had a lot of discomfort, but I didn't know where that was coming from. And primarily, I because I'm such a researcher at heart and always thinking and always curious, I wanted to know why that was. And that was literally why I wrote the book. I wanted to understand who I was, and I wanted to understand the other Black women that were questioning the same thing.
And I think it's really cool with regards to thinking about your superpower in that, that curiosity, that quest for knowledge. And I think what you described reminds me actually of one of the guests that we had for this podcast. She's a screenwriter, Trey Anthony, a director, but she talks about being in alignment and falling out of alignment sometimes as Black women, right? So like we're born in alignment is what she said, but then this world kind of sometimes takes us out of alignment. And as I was listening to you speak, I was like reflecting on those words, and that happens so often to us. Now I know now that you kind of fully take on the identity or, self-proclaim as a social justice warrior, right? Which is different than the identity that you speak of when you were trying to assimilate and, be in these white spaces. So I know from reading some of the interviews that you've done that like the murder of George Floyd played a role in that, or the video. And I'll come to that in a moment. But I wanted to know, were there, other experiences that kind of woke the giant within you to be more involved in advocacy and activism, either during your youth or, as you said, when you went to university in white spaces?
Yeah, the primary experience that I write about in the book and actually posted about on the LinkedIn platform, where I became a prolific poster, content creator, which really was not something I was used to doing during the time leading up to George Floyd. I started to post about some of my experiences at University of Florida. And because I work in higher education, I'm always thinking about student experience and how we as Black faculty and Black administrators have a responsibility to create nurturing spaces. And I think when I went to University of Florida, for the first time in my life I really started to see that I was not necessarily wanted in spaces. I think coming from London, obviously I was different because I was Black and I was from Europe. So I was different from the other 7th graders, but I was still very much the same as them. I was in the same neighborhood. The teachers still poured into me because they wanted me to be successful. So I didn't feel that I was othered. I just didn't have the same cultural capacity to really understand. And that was something that came with time. When I got to University of Florida, it was the total opposite. Everywhere around, we were reminded that it's almost the same thing that you hear about when people say, oh, you're a diversity hire. It was 90s and it was a lot of affirmative action, and students were being recruited actively to go to the school because they wanted to increase those numbers. But even in those spaces, you didn't get the sense that there was no vested interest in you being successful. It was more like, well, you're here, now be successful. And for a lot of us, we had been in environments where we had been nurtured and we had been guided and coached and mentored, but we didn't necessarily have the most elite schools. Our schools were underfunded. A lot of us, we were not necessarily elite students. We were smart and we worked hard, but we definitely didn't have the same foundation that a lot of students did. And that's when I really started to see those differences where other people that didn't look like me seemed to be fine. I was struggling in a lot of areas, and the instructors didn't seem to even be aware or care that I was struggling. The biggest impactful moment happened when I was a victim of racial profiling. So my sophomore year, I actually ended up being falsely arrested for shoplifting at a local pharmacy. And I think that was when I really became active. Like your question in terms of what activated me, that really was it. Because I think I always felt like, well, yeah, they're not supportive, but this is college. You got to work hard. I didn't really expect them to be supportive, and they didn't look like me and they didn't seem to really care. So I just said, well, this is just what it is. But I think going through that experience where you have done everything you're supposed to do. I was there on a full scholarship. I was a good student. I was getting good grades. And then I walked into a pharmacy, and this was a long time ago because I was dropping off film, and walked right out. Did not stop, did not shop because it was early on a Sunday morning and I just wanted to get back to campus. I had walked there, and the theft detector went off, and they immediately asked me to come back in. They hadn't even left the store. I was literally like right at the theft detector. And the young man said, hey, did you buy anything? I said, no, I just dropped off my film and I left. I didn't stop at all. I didn't even go anywhere near anything to purchase anything. And he was like, well, do you mind if I look in your bag? And my lawyer, I remember recounting the story to my lawyer, and he said, that was your first mistake. You shouldn't have let him look at anything because he didn't have any justification to even search your bag because you hadn't left the store. But I didn't know. I was just 19. So upon opening the bag, they find a pack of batteries. And, hey, did you buy this? Yeah, I bought that, but that was like 2 days ago. And okay, so where's your receipt? And as most...
Wait. You bought it 2 days ago, and he's like, where's your receipt?
Yeah, he asked me where was my receipt.
Who in the world still has the receipt for anything they bought?
Yeah, it was so bizarre. And as a child of, Jamaican parents, Black children in general, a lot of times we're told to keep our receipts, but it was such a small item. I started to get frantic because I'm like, a pack of batteries, would I really have a receipt? But I feel like I should have a receipt somewhere. Maybe it's in the bag.
I don't know. But
I started to get so flustered because the idea of asking me on demand to present a receipt.
Pause. Elizabeth is describing what so many Black people experience, which is often referred to as shopping while Black. Admittedly, hers is one of the worst cases I've encountered. And it's usually one of our most common worst fears because just being Black makes us suspicious to shop owners. Like, I remember as a teen, if me and my friends needed to go to the store, the rule was to never touch your school bag or dig in it for a list or anything, because for sure you were going to get stopped and it would delay the whole group. We were very aware of how we carried ourselves because we knew we were being watched as Black youth. It's really sad, but honestly, at that time, it was normal. It was just part of our everyday lives and just a rule that we followed. In Elizabeth's case, she didn't even touch anything in the store. She went to drop off film. But even she had been told to always have her receipts handy and even felt guilty when she couldn't find it. Clearly, nothing will protect us but justice. Policies and practices in retail and in our society at large need to be changed. A small example of this was in 2017 when Nova Scotia's Human Rights Commission launched an online training program aimed at preventing racial profiling in stores. They did this after receiving numerous complaints from Black and racialized minorities who had been profiled while shopping. It was the first of its kind in Canada, and it's not justice, but certainly a good step in the right direction. We need more steps in that direction.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. And as a child of, Jamaican parents, Black children in general, a lot of times we're told to keep our receipts, but it was such a small item. I started to get frantic because I'm like, a pack of batteries, would I really have a receipt? But I feel like I should have a receipt somewhere. Maybe it's in the bag.
I don't know.
But I started to get so flustered because the idea of asking me on demand to present a receipt, call the manager, discussing everything with the manager. I'm standing there because I just want them to put a paid sticker on so I can leave and go back to campus. Before I knew it, the manager asked me to go with her back into the office. And that was at the point where I knew things were going awry because it looked like it was becoming a little bit escalated and becoming more of a loss prevention issue because they didn't really seem to be listening to me that, hey, I did purchase the batteries. I don't know exactly where there's a receipt, but check the cameras. You guys have to be able to pull this up in the system. I'm trying to reason with them, and there really was no reasoning with them. The manager at that point asked me to sign a no trespass. And no trespass basically is you can't come in here anymore. You're admitting that you committed this crime. You shoplifted here. We don't want you to come back in the store. And if you do, after you sign acknowledging this, we'll call the police and we will say that you're trespassing. In my mind, I'm like, well, I can't sign that because that would be an admission of guilt. They may turn around and now say, oh, you admitted it. I really didn't know because I was like 19. Obviously, I'm not aware of the law, but I know that signing something that says I stole didn't seem like a good idea. So I just refused. The manager said, well, if you're not going to sign it, then I'm going to call the police and let the police deal with you because I'm giving you an opportunity to sign and leave, but you won't. So now I'm going to have to get the police involved. So I said, well, just do what you have to do because I'm not going to sign that. So
that sounds really coercive. Like, first of all, the fact that they have that letter is a problem. Like, with a teenager, you're still 19. You're an adult, but you're still 19. But then almost making it sound like, well, if you don't sign, I'm calling the cops. There might be young people back then who, because of their family, their upbringing, or their history, their own personal history with the police, might just sign that, an admission of guilt, because that sounds very coercive, especially for a young person.
Oh, it was. It reminds me of that movie When They See Us, where you have those 5 young men that were accused of rape in Brooklyn, and they were just coerced into admitting it because they just wanted to go home. And it's like, well, if you just say you did something, it's not going to be a big deal. Just say, because we just want to let you go. And I thought about that too, like this idea that it seems like they're trying a little bit too hard. Like, why do they want me to sign this paper? And I just refused. When the police got there, he kind of like was begging me to sign it. He was just like, just sign it. Like, all she wants you to do is sign it and we'll just let you go. I don't want to be here either, And I was like, well, I can't sign it, And it was like he was upset with me because he felt like I was being unreasonable. But my thought process was, well, it's unreasonable for you to ask me to lie because I haven't stolen this. So he said, well, you're not giving me any choice. I got to take you to jail. So I said, okay. So went into the parking lot where he handcuffed me, put me in the police car, and proceeded to take me to jail. Went to the county jail, called my mom. My mom's in Fort Lauderdale. So I'm in Gainesville. So Gainesville, state of Florida is pretty like that. Looks kind of like a boot shape or it's long. So Gainesville is like in the north. Fort Lauderdale's in the south. So she was like 5 hours away. And I called her and I said, listen, I need you to pay attention because I only have a little bit of time. I'm in jail and I need you to post bond. Here's the information. This is what you need to do. This is how much. It was like $700. Thank God she had it because she's a nurse.
What?
And I always think like if I would have been in a family that they were like $700, we don't have $700, which I mean could have been the case because I mean, some people don't have that, you know, but she had it, thank goodness.
A lot of people don't have that.
Yeah, you know.
Particularly for a situation where you're in school and it's not it's a crime you didn't commit, like all these levels. Like, yeah, for a family that's struggling to help, you know, a young woman through school, not everybody has that $700. And what does that mean?
Yeah. It was pretty wild, and she was very calm. Obviously, you know, from being in the healthcare field, you have to be cool under pressure, and there's sometimes things that come up, and you just have to be able to handle it. So she sounded very calm, and afterwards, she said she literally just fell on the ground like in a heap because she was just like so overwhelmed by it, knowing now she had to go get a bail bondsman, post bond, and then get on the road and drive 5 hours in a rush to come get me because I didn't know anyone with a car. This is way before Uber. And even if there would have been Uber, I didn't have money to get all the way back to campus, or I didn't know, I didn't have money for a taxi. And then they took my stuff anyway, because they did process me. So I got my stuff taken away. You must
have been terrified.
Yeah, I was scared, but I stayed really calm only because my mom asked me the same thing. How did you stay calm? I said, well, I knew if I would have started screaming and saying, oh, I didn't do it and flip tables, they would have probably, you know, beat me up or they would have like, you know, strong armed me. So I had to stay calm. But it was very unnerving. It's always like an out of body experience because it was like I knew it was a lot of things going through my mind. Like, okay, I'm being really calm. But by me being calm, it kind of looks like I'm guilty because it looks like I don't care. But I do care. But I know if I start yelling and going all, you know, just really professing my innocence, that they'll say I'm getting upset. So I have to stay calm and cool.
Yeah, stay calm.
So, yeah, I booked, mugshot, handcuffs, fingerprint, the whole 9 yards. They let me stay in a holding cell because they felt like, you know, you're going to post pretty soon and it'll take a few hours for bond to post, but not overnight. You probably won't be here overnight. Because usually bond takes a few hours to post. It just depends. So that gave my mom time to drive to get me. And then, you know, they were like, well, if your bond doesn't post by X time, we are going to have you go in the back into a cell. We'll have to give you clothes. We'll have to give you bedding, shoes, the whole 9 yards. Right now, you could stay with those clothes, your street clothes. But if your mom doesn't post bail in time, we'll have to have you go in the actual cell, like actual jail cell. And then you have to, you know, stay there the night. So I didn't want that.
That could have happened to anybody because your mom had the ability to leave her job and then drive the 5 hours. But for somebody who has a parent, even if they have the money, at least back then in the 90s, so you can't just send it money transfer or something like that. Even if she had the money but couldn't drive all the way there right away, you would have been like in a cell overnight at least. Oh my goodness. Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine. So that's what happened. She posted, I waited. They said, oh, you know, just hang out here, but, you know, you just see what happens. And then, thank goodness, the bond did post. And that was probably like 5 hours, like right as I posted, it posted, they released me, gave me my stuff, and I waited in like the lobby of the jail. And then she pulled up maybe like 20 minutes later. So I waited there and I was just distraught, just sitting there thinking about everything that happened, how messed up it was and how cold I was and how dirty I felt because I've been sitting there for hours. And when she pulled up, I went outside or she came inside to get me and just jumped in the car, just relieved not to, you know, be there. And at that point, you know, as an immigrant parent.
I was going to say, because we're talking about
Jamaican mom now.
Like, I'm wondering.
So she was kind of like, well, you know, happy that, you know, everything worked out and asked me, you know, the background of everything, because we hadn't really gotten a chance to speak. But then it was kind of like, well, they gave you a chance to just sign the form and go home. Why you just didn't sign? And I'm just like, no. Like, if I would, it was kind of like in my mom's mind, like the path of least resistance. Now you have a criminal record. Now we got to get you a lawyer. Now we got to figure out how to get, how are you going to get out of this situation? Because now we got to figure out all the, the logistics of the fact that, now that you're out, we still have to figure out how to get this resolved, because you have to see the judge. You have this. It's not like just an arrest. And, you have to resolve it.
Yeah. And I think that's a key piece with a lot of issues around profiling and racism. Like, you basically were in a situation of shopping while Black.
Yes.
But what a lot of our immigrant parents and those who are immigrants who come here, often the advice, and in some cases it is, I don't want to like poo-poo that advice, because it's at times legitimate, but it's like survival advice, which is just like, just put your head down. Like, whatever it is, put your head down and keep going and just get to where you need to be.
That's it. And they told us what they thought was best.
Yes. But that's survival, which is different than surthrival. And so, okay, so you had this this event, but I know also you said the George Floyd moment kind of amped up things as far as your journey in social warrior work, right, and advocacy work. So I'm wondering, what was it between? Like, was it just a slight, you know what I mean, like a push, or from that moment and what you went through and that moment of shopping while Black, your voice became, like you got more heavily in activism? Where along that journey between that moment and, let's say, the horrible video of the murder of George Floyd, does the full-fledged, authentic activist as yourself emerge?
Yeah, it was like a push forward and a push back, because I did have the receipt. The receipt was actually in my bag the whole time. It was stuck in a folder.
Oh, wow.
So when she picked me up, as she was kind of berating me for, not just taking the path of least resistance, I actually filed the receipt, and it was tucked away in the bottom of my bag. So got a lawyer, presented to the lawyer. The lawyer's like, you know what? This is ridiculous. Like, he was outraged, older white man. And he's like, I've never seen anything like this before. We're going to get these charges dropped. And the fact that I had stood up to them, it sparked an idea. And he said, what we should do is file a civil lawsuit against them. You're not going to get rich, but what we will do is send a message to let them know never to do this again, because what they did was unfair and it was wrong. And we know why they did it, so we're going to make sure that they pay. They fought me for 3 years. They would not admit.
Oh, girl.
Even when...
3 years?
Yeah, 3 years. And when it finally... My lawyer kept telling him, just give her a few $1,000s. She doesn't really want to get rich here. She just wants... This is the principle of this at this time. They refused. They said that it was not their fault. And they said it was the police's fault. And my lawyer was like, well, if you hadn't called the police wouldn't even been a part of this equation. So you're going to have to pay for her now, because you gave this pain and suffering. Everything that she has to do now is because of your call that you made. You could have just let her go. So
you fought back for 3 years, which could be very draining.
It was.
And then
it was.
After that, did you win the case?
I won. The judge, the jury found in my favor, and it was like a few $1,000s, like $10,000. And after I gave him his cut, but it really wasn't about that. And I think what happened was I was empowered by the idea that I was able to hold them accountable, but also very scared of the idea that, wow, just because of my skin color, just because someone didn't give me any kind of benefit of the doubt, just because somebody felt like, oh, well, who cares about your feelings or about your potential to be innocent? So it actually made me go back in my shell. I graduated late. I was like not going to class. I actually finished, but I didn't even really want to work in journalism anymore. I just wanted something easy, and I just wanted to just rest, because I felt depleted after that.
Yeah, because that's exhausting.
Very.
Now, so let's, so then it was back, you came out, you pushed, you won, but it took so much out of you that you decided to assimilate, which for much of us, assimilation also eats us up and takes a lot of energy, right? Because you're performing, right? And you're not your true authentic self during that time. So now let's fast forward to 2020. And certainly the death of George Floyd was a major wake-up call for everybody. But I know that you described kind of like that moment, because you had been avoiding the video is what I understand. Yeah. And I actually have never watched the full 8-minute video, because I'm a Black woman. I work in anti-racism. There is no reason for me to experience that vicarious trauma. But it just so happened that, it was on the news and it was, in your face. So after having been in that shell of trying to, you know what I mean? I think for a lot of people, it's just dealing with everyday racism and suppressing it, right? And you just keep things moving. What can you describe the experience for you of what that awakened for you?
Yeah, it was like a trigger because I think hearing and seeing that, and I had avoided it, but then seeing it, seeing how, painful and just how just it was very clinical, even the way that it was on the news. It was just like you said, it's like that observation of trauma happening and not understanding that a lot of us have had encounters with police. A lot of us have felt what it feels like. I could understand this thought of, I don't want to go to jail. I don't feel like I deserve this. I don't want to be handcuffed and arrested. And I related to that a lot. I related to that idea of being blamed. Like a lot of the blame that happened with my situation was, well, why didn't you present the receipt quicker? We gave you an opportunity. Everything was blaming me rather than blaming the fact that they weren't even following their own store policy, which said they would have had to witness me do it. There were a lot of things that were in their own manual, which was why I won my case, because they did not follow their own store procedure. So looking at the victim blaming, looking at the idea that you have someone that is a 6'3", 6'4", dark-skinned Black man that is said to, hey, you should have done this, this, and this in order to live. Not even in order, like in my situation where it was like, oh, if you would have did better, we wouldn't have taken you to jail. He was literally lynched, murdered in front of us. And it was still, he was being blamed because he didn't fit this mold of he should have complied. He should not have been a drug addict. He should not, anything they accused him of, or his past. And I really wanted to speak up about my situation because it triggered me really badly. If that could have been me. If I would have struggled, if I would have not been able to contain myself, maybe I would have been in that same situation.
Pause. I had to take a mindful moment myself after the murder of George Floyd and the global activism that followed. Here I was, a physician who had been advocating about anti-Black racism for over a decade. At times, I was ridiculed or politely ignored. And then, all of a sudden, two things happened. White people started saying Black Lives Matter, and then many of the Black professionals I knew who had not joined me over the last decade in any advocacy started saying Black Lives Matter and speaking up like they'd always been in the struggle, and also taking up speaking opportunities as advocates, and some people even asking me for my slides so they could use them in their presentations. My work, my blood, sweat, and tears that had been ignored for a decade, and now everyone who didn't speak up before wanted to capitalize on my work without paying me or even crediting me. It was upsetting and honestly heartbreaking, particularly coming from, some of my Black peers. But it also felt to me like they were being performative, like they didn't really care about the community. So, in my mind, I was like, where the hell you been this whole time? But then I had to take a step back and breathe, meditate, and remember what racism is. It's trauma. And people deal with trauma in different ways. One of which is denial or suppression just to survive. I had to get off my high horse and check my bitterness to realize that, similar to the #MeToo movement, many of the people who are stepping up were not frauds or performers within the community. Okay, some were, okay? But so many more were people who had lived with the trauma of racism, suppressed it, and now, with that video, could no longer suppress it, and they wanted to genuinely take action. And that is a beautiful thing. And Elizabeth's story is a perfect example of what I suspected happened that year for so many Black professionals. The wounds that had never fully healed were ripped open, and many realized what Audre Lorde told us: your silence will not save you. I am now glad and grateful to no longer be a lonely voice in my field, and so happy to be part of a chorus, speaking out about the detrimental impacts of racism on our health and within our healthcare systems.
So looking at the victim blaming, looking at the idea that you have someone that is a 6'3", 6'4", dark-skinned Black man that is said to, hey, you should have done this, this, and this in order to live. Not even in order, like in my situation where it was like, oh, if you would have did better, we wouldn't have taken you to jail. He was literally lynched, murdered in front of us. And it was still, he was being blamed because he didn't fit this mold of he should have complied. He should not have been a drug addict. He should not, anything they accused him of, or his past. And I really wanted to speak up about my situation because it triggered me really badly of that could have been me. You know, if I would have struggled, if I would have not been able to contain myself, maybe I would have been in that same situation. And that is what activated me. This idea that that internal trauma that I had suppressed from my own arrest, I feel like it bubbled up because I wanted people to see that contrast. I'm 5'1" at the time that, or 5'2", I think, in shoes. At the time that I was arrested, I think I was like 110 pounds. They didn't even think I was supposed to be in adult jail. They thought I was supposed to be in juvenile. So I'm like the most unassuming person. And that still, I was racially profiled. And I really wanted to draw a contrast. People are saying, oh, he's so intimidating. Look at his size. Look at what he should have done. Look at his violent past. Look at his drug addiction. Look at what he was doing. He was doing the wrong thing. And I'm like, well, let me show myself. Because people think that this only happens to a Mike Brown. This only happens to a Trayvon Martin. This only happens to, and Philando Castile. This only happens to George Floyd. Women, this happens to us too. This happens to children. Tamir Rice, he was 14. And I wanted to really draw that contrast. And even though there was a lot of shame in my own situation, no one knew I had been arrested. Even people that my roommate knew, my mom, my family knew, my mom and dad, because they were the ones that obviously were there to guide me through the whole situation. But no one knew. I didn't tell people I went to college with, people in high school. No one in my circles knew, even people that had known me for, since college. So I felt like it was important for me to be really transparent because I wanted to show people that the Black experience is not what they think, that many of us go through racial profiling. Many of us have trauma from being accused of things that we know we didn't do. Many of us know that we're treated differently because of the color of our skin. That awareness had been with me since my arrest, but I really suppressed that because I just wanted to hide. I wanted to be unobscure. I wanted to assimilate so it wouldn't happen again. And looking at him, I just told myself there's nothing that I could have done. Like I took that blame away from myself and I used that to activate me into helping people to understand. And I say helping because it's not easy to get people to understand because no matter how many experiences sometimes we share, it's very challenging to get people to really understand our experience, which is why I'm really very passionate about sharing our stories, sharing our narratives, creating space so that we can help each other to heal, because I think it's really important for us to not have that shame, for us not to feel like, oh, I'm the only one that's going through this. And I can't tell anyone because then people will feel like I'm not a good person. And that's what I walked around with. And that's why all the experiences that I've been through, I'm very transparent because I want to create space so that people say, someone told me this yesterday, well, I'm so glad you said that because I thought it was me. And I'm like, it's not you. I want us to make sure that we create space for our experiences and our narratives, because when people are telling our stories, they're telling it in a way that vilifies us and blames us, rather than telling it from a position of empathy. And my position for my Black community is always going to be one of empathy and always one of love and always one of understanding, because I've been through a lot of things that we've all shared. Yes. And I think a lot of times we collectively don't share our stories because we feel shame, or we feel like, well, if I tell that story, I'm going to make my community look bad. And the fact of the matter is, we are sharing things that we're the victim of. We should not feel bad. We shouldn't feel ashamed. Yes. We have to create space to share our own stories and our trauma sometimes, but understanding that if we share these stories as a community, as a collective, we've always shared so that we could heal and move through trauma. If you stay in it by yourself, you don't have room to heal. And by me sharing my story, so many people came forward and tell me the same thing had happened to them. I had men tell me I was stop and frisk and they stole my money. I had this happen where I was pulled out of my car and they said they were going to bring the dogs to search my car, and I'm a pastor. I had so many people tell me, you know what, I'm so glad you shared your story, because now you created space for me to tell my story. So that was really that narrative of sharing. It healed me, and I wanted to share that with other people.
No, it's so powerful. And I want to thank you for bringing these things up, because, you know, colonization and structural racism, the way they work as a structure is the same way it works within, let's say, families and abuse, right? So that the victim feels shame and keeps silence and holds that trauma, right? Instead of recognizing that there's a bigger issue at play. And so where we hold that trauma, it doesn't help us, but it's the way it always turns around, right? To like, why were you there? Why did you this? And so people keep that silence, and it's deadly to keep that within ourselves and our families. We do need to speak up and speak out, because, as you said, with the George Floyd, people can be like, oh, you know, not really in his case, but with all the other cases, because that one was pretty much cut and dry. People saw the whole video, but so many others, it's like, why was that person, or were they involved in this or that? You know, and even here in Canada, you know, we've had, you know, issues with police violence. We certainly have a legacy of slavery and anti-Black racism, but all of that was largely ignored. But again, with the video on the George Floyd and the activism by Black Lives Matter here, people started coming forward. And many people who had suppressed, as you had you know, done and had been in white spaces, began to speak out. And even my own mother, my late mother, during that time, she mentioned something to me that she had never mentioned. She mentioned that actually my dad had been held at gunpoint by the police. Oh, no. And he had had a small stroke, and he was just coming out of the hospital in Montreal, and it was two policewomen, but they just had him at gunpoint, and they were like, don't move, you fit the description. And he, although it was a minor stroke, you know, wasn't like full, you know what I mean? He froze, and then he was still able to follow commands. But my father did have subsequent strokes after that. But God forbid, he was in this position where he couldn't fully, you know, cooperate with their commands and everything going on. And of course, they said he fit the description. But I mean, that is for any Black man, because he was in his 60s. You know what I mean? Like, of whoever they were looking for. But my mom was terrified. But on the other hand, never mentioned it at all, right? Because it was just like, oh, well, that's the police. I'm like, did you get their badge numbers? Like, what happened? She's like, oh, gosh, that was so many years ago. And you know what I mean? Like, that was it. Because we suppress these things. This is part of, you know, living while Black. But again, it's about that survival. It's about the overcoming. It's about, you know, fighting the system and trying to stay well at the same time. What I'm now calling being a good ancestor, right? Because we can't change everything right now. The amount of challenges and barriers are infinite. Yeah. We are finite, but we all have to do our part. And you are doing your part. So let's talk about some of you're doing so many things. It's fantastic. One thing that I think is really cool, a lot of things you're doing are really cool, but I haven't heard this before, like recognized as LinkedIn as a top 10 voice in education. And you're speaking about issues of anti-Black racism. Can you speak, and you got that recognition from LinkedIn in 2020. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey, because it's so unique?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually it's been a roller coaster since 2020. And I think what happened in 2020 was I became activated after George Floyd's murder, and I really felt like it was my responsibility to speak up about racial injustice and inequity and racial profiling in the criminal justice system. Because I was an educator, I was also talking about the pivot to online, the digital divide, what we need to do to be more mindful about creating environments where our students can be successful. And a lot of our students, for me, working in the career space, they're first generation, they're coming from immigrant family. Sometimes they speak English as a second language. So I felt it was really important for me to bring that perspective, because a lot of those students that we serve in South Florida, I grew up in the same neighborhoods that they did and they have. And I wanted to be really just very vocal in what higher education's responsibility is. And then after George Floyd was murdered, and also making sure that we created environments where our students felt like they were supported through that. So that was a big part of my advocacy work in 2020. Criminal justice system and where things are not what they need to be, and looking at the stats and looking at how Black folk have been really negatively impacted really since the end of slavery. And this has been a system of really that school to prison pipeline and the industrial prison complex, everything that really has been done. I mean, Ava DuVernay did an excellent job in 13th Amendment of breaking it down, exactly how the criminal justice system has really created an extension of slavery. If you think about it, the chain gangs and everything that was put into place, these laws for vagrancy and all these other things, our communities really being under-resourced. So you have people really doing things that they really shouldn't be doing, but a lot of that is systemic in nature. The school systems are underfunded, so you have people that are not prepared to even be functional in society. And I didn't want to be weaponized as an immigrant. I don't like that model minority mindset where people will say, well, you did it. You're an immigrant. You're not even from here. That is not the point. And I'm always quick to let people know that my status as an immigrant or my ability to overcome should not be a barometer. That shouldn't be like to be able to do what I've done. That should not be what people have to do. It's almost like saying, well, Oprah is a millionaire or a billionaire. That's one person, you know?
It's exceptionalism. Nobody,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's like looking at Usain Bolt and saying, okay, well, if he could run that fast, everybody should run that fast and you'll get to where you're going. That's absolutely ridiculous, especially when our white counterparts are like strolling, but we're all supposed to sprint like Usain Bolt. Like, it's just that kind of exceptionalism is poison, and we should have the right to be human beings as our white peers and colleagues and friends are. That means you succeed and you make mistakes, but you're seen as a human being. So again, how were you able to decide to work that into LinkedIn though?
I don't know. I think, and that's the funny thing about it. A lot of people ask me that. And I think what happened was with 2020, it was something really a mile marker. It's like 2020, you know, it just seems like it was new decade. So it was really just new year, new me. And because of me already starting to post about the digital divide and online learning and serving our students, when George Floyd was murdered, I was stuck in, do I keep posting about equity from the standpoint of a higher education professional and a college professor is invested in outcomes for students? Or do I really talk about my own journey that I've had interactions with the police myself that were negative, that I don't think that people that are clutching their pearls and saying this is not America, that is inherently untrue because I teach American literature and this is very much America. And what responsibility do I have as an educator? And I wasn't on any other social media platforms at that time. And if I was, I really wasn't producing content. I was already producing content on LinkedIn as a higher education professional with a perspective on online learning and the pandemic. And what that expertise meant was not job hunting, because I've been at my job almost a decade. So it was really more for me professional development and meeting people and making sure that people understood the value of online learning, which was where I've always worked. But I guess the impetus for posting was I already had a platform. People were already listening to my voice because I had a podcast on higher education. And at the time, I told my podcast co-host, maybe I should take a break because I don't feel like I'm in a mental space right now to talk to college presidents and really laugh and talk about online learning. It just doesn't seem appropriate.
You're like, I'm not in the mood.
I was not in the mood for that. I just felt like this is not. And it's funny, they were both, I met them both on LinkedIn. One comes from an Italian background and one's Puerto Rican. So white presenting, white, racialized white, because they present as white.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, just talking to them, they were just like, well, what you could do, this is just a suggestion. They were really, be careful. They were like, why don't you use your platform and get people to understand how you feel, that you're frustrated, that the Black experience really is not what people think it is, that everything that's happening around the country, really educate people because that's what you do anyway. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do that. And I just started posting every day. I posted every day for about 2 years. Multiple times a day sometimes.
Exploded, right? Like what did you start off with and then where is it now?
I went from 7,000 or so, because I had quite a few followers of people that were listening to the podcast because it started to get pretty popular in the first few months of the year. I went from 7,000 followers to right now like 158,000, something like that. I'm somewhere in the 150s, 150 something thousand. Because I was at one point getting either like 1,000 followers a day, sometimes 1,000 followers a week. Because I think what happened was because I really wasn't job hunting, I really looked at it as a classroom. I wasn't in the classroom because we were working from home, and I was not going to campus because we were sheltering in place. So it was almost like this is my opportunity as an educator. You know, I have a responsibility to educate people about Black history and culture. It's something that I don't teach. I teach American literature. I usually don't teach Black studies or specific to the Black experience, but I do love reading. You know, I've always loved reading about the Black experience just from my childhood and coming to this country. So people were clutching their pearls and saying they didn't understand why Black folk felt so conflicted. And I was like, they haven't read The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. I read that in high school. They don't understand that Black folk were kings and queens. I read Sheikh Ante Diop, African Origin of Civilization in 11th grade. Where have these people been? But a lot of people were saying they never even took Black history. They didn't understand anything about the Black experience. They had not been exposed to Black teachers. And I started to see that my preparation in Fort Lauderdale, growing up in my community, gave me like a unique perspective on the world. And even Black folk were telling me, hey, they were telling me they never had Black teachers and they didn't really know a lot of this history. So I felt like it was my responsibility, definitely first and foremost, to inform my own community about our own shared culture, because that's my culture now since I live here and I was raised here. And I have a responsibility to, let me talk about the ancestors. I have a responsibility. If I have a voice and I can tell their story, it would be irresponsible of me not to share this knowledge, especially when Black folk were saying, I didn't know we were, great kings and queens. I didn't know there were Black folk that did this and that. I have to tell them that so that they can feel the empowerment that I feel.
No, I mean, I know, like your post with, how does it, I adjust my crown and speaking about the different kings and queens, because as youth, I went to Black History camp in the summer, right? So my parents used to send me to Black History camp. But so often, unfortunately, even with Black History Month, so much of it is focused either on slavery or after European contact, that a lot of folks, even who think they know Black history, whether in Canada, United States, or elsewhere, do not know about the African kingdoms and, you know what I mean? Really deeply who we were and who we've been, whether it's, the Dahomey, right? Now there's the movie, but, understanding, right? Ourselves as warriors, kings, and queens. Now, there's so many ways that you have been using your superpower where you have, been reading and then educating. And so I want to come back full circle. We talked about the book. And so I'm hoping that you might want to give some strategies from the book. I know, y'all should go out and get the book, right? So it's on Amazon, it's on Audible. But whatever you are comfortable sharing as a future ancestor and an educator. But your book, I'm Not Yelling, gives some strategies and some frameworks for healing. And it's in alignment very much with what our show is about, right? About the survival. So can you share some tips? Again, what you feel comfortable sharing.
Absolutely.
And I do encourage people to go out and get the book, but please do educate us, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the core is what we talked about in the beginning about who are you, knowing who you are, leaning into who you are. I think a lot of us have been taught, and our parents, they taught, and our grandparents in our communities, they taught us what they thought was the best, which is the path of least resistance. But for most of us, that's assimilating to your environment. We always hear this, seen and not heard, put your nose down, work twice as hard. And I think for a lot of us, we were taught those lessons because they thought that was the best thing. But it does create this environment where we are working ourselves into the ground. There is a lot of toxicity in these environments, and we're kind of just smiling and going along with it. We look at it as the black tax. We look at it like, well, this is what my parents told me it was going to be. Hey, it's work. You expect it to be fun. It's that if you want fun, wait till after work. It's almost a sense that you're supposed to be punished when you're at work. And it's just like our counterparts are skipping along, skip to Malou, and wearing our cue, like banging our head on the keyboard while they're just like, having, the best time in the world. So I wanted to really focus on, at our core, and talking about being a good ancestor, we don't know when these environments will change, if they will ever change. And I always say that, and I think people probably feel like it's being, pessimistic, but the fact of the matter is this is where we're at today. So for me, I felt like I'm speaking to Black women, the Black community in general, and particularly Black women, since I'm coming from that lens. And there's some things that we encounter in predominantly white spaces that are unique to Black womanhood. So I really wanted to lean into this idea of who are we as women? How do we really engage our voices and empower our voices? Most of us have been taught you can't be loud, you can't be all aggressive. They always think we mad. So there was a sense that we were being hampered by stereotypes and narratives that have been used to weaponize and quiet us. And we know that was a tool of colonization as well. You don't know who you are.
Yes.
You be quiet. You could be killed if you speak up. If you lean into your authenticity, you could be killed for that. And a lot of us, that epigenics and that generational trauma is real, where we are literally trying to make ourselves into, and I talk about it in the book, this character of Angela, it's my middle name, and how I would be this valley girl and be so like, have this like super high voice and high clip tone. And
oh my God.
Right? Oh, y'all.
Oh my
Oh my God.
Yes, we've all done it
Yeah.
at different times. It's awesome.
Oh my God, it's totally awesome. And we know how to do it. And a lot of us think that is our superpower. And I'm like, why is our superpower something that is not as good as we are? We're so dope. We're so fresh. We are culture.
Oh, I love that.
And we're imitating something that is like unseasoned. So I just started to really talk about that. Like, why would you want to be unseasoned chicken when you could be like curry chicken or jerk chicken or something that's spicy and popping and tastes good? Like, I wouldn't take an unseasoned chicken breast over curry chicken. That would be ridiculous. So why am I making myself an unseasoned chicken breast when I could be like brown stew chicken and rice and peas? That's no sense whatsoever. So leaning into authenticity, leaning into who we really are, leaning into the power of the ancestors. I really believe in that. I believe that we come from greatness, we come from royalty, and sometimes we're so busy trying to assimilate to a culture that is trying to be like us, but doesn't want to admit that they are really jealous of us and want to be us. So I'm just like, this doesn't make any sense, and we have to, like, since they don't know any better. And I also feel like sometimes it's like a little bit of emotional intelligence. We're highly emotionally intelligent. A lot of Black folk, we literally spend our lives observing everything around us because we have to make sure that we know what's going on. And and we're imitating something that is oblivious to everything, and it's very centered in its own identity, and its own identity is really based on subjection, oppression, mediocrity. There's so many different things that we see, to be honest with you, that it's really infuriating that we're going into spaces and asking people, can you treat me the same as you treat yourself? And it's like, well, let me see what I can do. And I hold on. Let me go into, let me confer with my friends. Can you give me some research and some data on why I should do that? Because I don't even think that's happening. It's like, but it is happening, because how come I'm not in that room with you guys? It's just like the delusional aspect of what is happening. It wasn't escaping me, but I was like, well, I can't heal someone. And I've learned this from trauma survival in my own personal life. I can't heal someone that doesn't even admit there's something wrong with them. Anyone that's a survivor of abuse, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, most of the time that person doesn't think what they did is wrong. So you trying to get closure to tell that person, oh, you did something wrong, there's really no point in doing that. You have to really heal yourself, because that person is constantly going to deflect. That person's going to tell you about their trauma. That person's going to tell you, oh, that's why they ask women, well, what were you wearing? What difference does it make? If that person was walking naked, they should not get abused. They should not be treated in any way that deserves that. But we often hear people trying to victimize or trying to blame someone, and then that person carries that trauma and that blame. So that's really what the book was about. Let's talk about who you really are at your core. That is dope. Let's talk about your voice. Your voice carries. Your voice, don't make it high like a valley girl. Keep that bass in your voice, because our voice has power. Our ancestors have imbued that in us, and we're really all that power that we have inside us. We're not acknowledging the richness of what we are at our core. That's so much untapped energy that we're not tapping into to create amazing things. It's hard to really create and be imaginative when you're always scared, when you're always worried you're going to say the wrong thing, when you're under threat of PTSD, when you're worrying the double consciousness. What are they thinking about me? Am I saying this right? Do I sound chipper enough? Am I smiling enough? It just
Am I smiling enough? Yes.
Like, are you mad? It's like, no, I'm not mad. I'm just thinking. And I'm quick to tell people that. The microaggressions, making sure that another strategy I tell people in the book, check a microaggression. Because when I'm teaching, I don't allow students to overtalk and cut up in the back of the class and make noise while I'm teaching. But I will allow an adult that is a leader in their organization to talk over me. I will not. Because I don't let a 19-year-old do that. So why are you, a grown adult, given a pass and I'm going to let you interrupt me? I don't let students interrupt me. So why would I let someone that's a 50-year-old middle-aged man with more degrees on his wall than anything interrupt me to tell me something that doesn't make any sense? I will not. So I started really pushing back on a lot of the things I had been doing. Because it seemed to me that if George Floyd or Emmett Till or anyone that didn't do anything wrong, even myself that had been arrested, could be on their best behavior, really, and still be killed or arrested or put in jail, I had no business going into a meeting and letting someone do something and then them blame me because I checked them for being unprofessional. I just tell women that all the time. If you're scared to point out bad behavior or to push back on things that people are doing that make you uncomfortable, and you're saying that you can't correct it because you will have a target on your back, I would posit that you already have a target on your back. Because that person felt brave enough to do that to you, so you already have a target on your back.
Thank you, girl. I mean, I'm feeling that the quote from ancestor poet Audre Lorde, right? Your silence will not save you.
That's it. That is a word.
And that is exactly it.
If you smile while they're killing you, they'll say you liked it. And if you're silent while they're killing you, they'll say you liked it. And that comes from Zora Neale Hurston, the ancestor. This idea that if we just smile and bear it, we're taught that if we do that, everything will be fine. But that doesn't work. You know?
No, and your body keeps the score. Now, there are times I'm not saying everybody should talk back to the police when they're in a situation, right? There are situations, let's not be extreme, there are situations where it makes sense to be quiet.
Like I did when I encountered them. I was real quiet. So we don't want to take that too far.
Yeah, we don't want to take it too far. But it's being intentional about it. And being quiet is not your best resource, long term. Yes. And also it's deciding, perhaps in this moment to be quiet, but then I'm going to go get allies. Then I'm going to go get people, and we're going to advocate, and we're going to speak up, and we're going to do either the sit-in or the petition or support something in community with our dollars and our energy, whatever outlet that is. But the other thing that I'm hoping that we do, because, yes, we live in a racialized world, is find joy. And so one of the questions that I always like to ask in the podcast is, what brings you joy? Because this work you do is hard work, girl. It's the work, right? Definitely when we're talking about being a good ancestor, wow. So at the same time, though, you are here with us now. And so as you walk this earth, what brings you joy?
This brings me joy. Being in community with other Black folk that are doing the work. I would say that is the favorite part of my day. And I thank you for even inviting me into this space, because this space is so beautiful and enriching. And I think that's really what keeps me going. When I get conversations that really I feel heard and seen, and I know that I'm understood, and that I feel as though there's an energy that is beyond me, and that energy is emanating. That is what brings me joy. Knowing that I get messages, emails, DMs, you name it, from people, Black women and Black men, that are saying, keep going. The ancestors are behind you. We're behind you. We appreciate what you're doing. This thing that you said, it helped me. You're helping me to empower myself. I feel braver when I see you doing these things. It makes me ecstatic. because my goal, my life's work, I really wasn't sure what that would be, but I always felt like in every environment I was in, especially as a college professor, I'm here to help someone feel seen and heard and help them to know that they're not alone, because I always felt alone. So I didn't want anyone else to feel that. So my joy comes from, even if I'm laying myself bare and I feel as though I'm alone, I know that people that look like me are watching me and I'm encouraging them. So I want to continue to do that. And that gives me so much satisfaction, because I know that this is beyond me. So I want to make sure that I'm being that good ancestor. So many came before me that helped me to be where I am today. So I want to provide that for others. So that's what brings me joy.
Oh my goodness, it's a beautiful thing, and we are so grateful. I am so grateful. So yes, Elizabeth, Leiba, I see you, I hear you, we are with you, and we appreciate you. So thank you for being my guest on Race, Health, and Happiness.
Thank you for having me.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr. Onye, and she's our host. I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel, executive producer of the show. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Our showrunner is Cam, and JL Joseph is associate producer. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson, and Javiera Violeta Duran Quieres is our logistics coordinator. Tamika E. Latibaudiere is our research consultant, and Corinne Bent Womack is our anti-racism consultant. Our student associate producers are Xavier Oshinowo and Afia McIntosh. Veronica Ng is our graphic design consultant, and the RHH theme song is composed and performed by Gold Keys. Special thanks to Awit Siem and Darrell Carpentier for their voiceover work. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at RaceHealth&Happy, and check out the show notes for research that was referenced in this episode, as well as other bonus material. Our website is RaceHealth&Happiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. This is Dr. Carl. On behalf of the whole RHH team, we'll talk with you soon.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is brought to you with help from Toronto Metropolitan University and with support from subscribers and listeners like you. Overcome the obstacles of racism while staying happy and healthy. Donate today at patreon.com/racehealthhappy. We are learning together to thrive. Thank you for your support. The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is made better by the skills, knowledge, and creative passion of the journalism students who work right here on the show. These students join us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for the hard work, folks. We appreciate you.